Imagine coming home from work on an ordinary Tuesday evening, expecting to find your family gathered around the dinner table, laughing about their day. Instead, you discover a secret so devastating, it destroys everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and family. What I witnessed in my own home that night didn't just change my life, it shattered my entire world. But here's the thing, the discovery wasn't the worst part. What happened afterward? The lies that followed, the manipulation, the way my own family turned against me, that nearly destroyed me completely. Before we go deeper into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Sarah, and for 32 years, I believed I had the perfect family. My mother, Rebecca, was the kind of woman everyone in our small Michigan town admired. She volunteered at the local church every Sunday, baked cookies for school fundraisers, and had this incredible way of making everyone feel special. Growing up, she was my anchor, my best friend, my role model. When I got married to Michael and we had our son, David, Mom became the most devoted grandmother you could imagine. Every Saturday morning, she'd arrive at our house with fresh pancakes and stories that made David giggle until his sides hurt. She taught him how to plant tomatoes in her backyard garden, how to skip stones across the lake behind our neighborhood, how to tie his shoes using what she called bunny ears. Those moments felt like pure magic. David absolutely worshipped his grandmother. When he turned 16 last year, instead of wanting to hang out with friends like most teenagers, he'd choose to spend his weekends at Mom's house. She'd help him with his homework. They'd watch old movies together, and sometimes I'd find them having these deep conversations about life and dreams. As his mother, I felt so grateful, so blessed that my son had such a strong, positive influence in his life. Michael used to joke that David loved his grandmother more than his own parents, and honestly, I didn't mind. The bond they shared reminded me of my own relationship with Mom when I was growing up. It felt natural, healthy, beautiful. Looking back now, I realize there were tiny moments that should have made me pause. The way Mom would quickly end phone calls when I walked into the room. How she'd become overly protective when David mentioned hanging out with friends his own age. The way she'd always find excuses for David to stay over at her house, even on school nights. But I dismissed these things as normal grandmother behavior. After all, she was just being caring, right? She was just worried about her grandson growing up too fast, just wanting to spend as much time as possible with him before he left for college. These thoughts made perfect sense to me then. I actually found her devotion touching, admirable. Something I hope to emulate when I became a grandmother someday. Our family dinners were legendary in our circle of friends. Every Sunday, we'd gather around Mom's mahogany dining table, the one that had been in our family for 3 generations. The smell of her famous pot roast would fill the entire house. David would tell us about his week at school, his plans for the future, his dreams of becoming an engineer. Mom would listen with such intense focus, hanging on his every word like he was delivering the most important speech in the world. These dinners were sacred to us. They represented everything good about family, tradition, love. Michael would always say that these Sunday gatherings were what kept our family strong, what made us different from other families who barely saw each other anymore. We were close, we were connected, we were everything a family should be, or so I thought. About 6 months ago, things started to change in ways so subtle that I almost missed them entirely. David became more secretive, more distant. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me short, one-word answers instead of his usual enthusiastic stories. When his friends called the house asking if he wanted to hang out, he'd make excuses, saying he had too much homework or wasn't feeling well. The strangest part was how he'd light up whenever Mom was around. It was like watching 2 different people. The quiet, withdrawn teenager who lived in our house, and the animated, happy young man who emerged whenever his grandmother was present. I started noticing how their conversations would stop abruptly when I entered the room, how they'd exchange these knowing glances that made me feel like an outsider in my own family. One evening in October, I decided to surprise them with David's favorite chocolate chip cookies. I drove to Mom's house unannounced, something I'd done hundreds of times before without thinking twice. When I knocked on the front door, it took an unusually long time for someone to answer. When Mom finally opened it, she seemed flustered, almost nervous. Her hair was disheveled, and she kept adjusting her robe even though it was only 7 in the evening. "Sarah, honey, what are you doing here?" she asked, blocking the doorway with her body. Behind her, I could hear movement, footsteps, and what sounded like David's voice calling out that he'd be right down. But something in Mom's tone, something in her posture, felt wrong. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't welcome in my mother's home. "I brought cookies," I said, holding up the container and trying to peer past her into the living room. "I thought David might want some for his study session tonight." "Oh, that's so sweet, dear, but David's he's not feeling well. I think it's better if you don't come in tonight. We wouldn't want you catching whatever he has." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that it took me a moment to process what she'd said. David had seemed perfectly fine when he'd left our house 3 hours earlier. As I drove home that night, my mind kept replaying the interaction. Why had Mom seemed so nervous? Why hadn't David come to the door to say hello, even if he was sick? And why did I feel this growing pit of uneasiness in my stomach? This nagging sense that something was terribly wrong. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to the little details I'd previously overlooked. Phone calls between Mom and David that would end abruptly when I walked into the room. Text messages on David's phone that he'd quickly hide when I glanced over. The way Mom would insist on picking David up from school instead of letting him take the bus home, claiming she was just being helpful, but her eagerness seemed excessive. I found myself analyzing every interaction, every conversation, every shared glance between them. Was I losing my mind? Was I imagining things that weren't there? The rational part of my brain kept telling me I was being ridiculous, that I was creating problems where none existed. But the mother's instinct, that deep, primal knowing that something wasn't right, grew stronger with each passing day. Michael noticed my growing anxiety and tried to reassure me. "Sarah, you're overthinking this. Your mom has always been close with David. There's nothing wrong with a grandmother loving her grandson." But even as he said the words, I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He'd noticed the changes too. The way our family dynamic had shifted in ways that felt uncomfortable and strange. March 15th will forever be burned into my memory as the night my world collapsed. I was supposed to work late at the accounting firm where I'm employed as a senior analyst, but our client meeting was canceled at the last minute. Instead of calling ahead, instead of letting anyone know I was coming home early, I decided to surprise my family with takeout from David's favorite Chinese restaurant. When I pulled into our driveway at 6:30, I noticed that Michael's car wasn't there, which made sense because Thursdays were his poker nights with college friends. David was supposed to be at Mom's house working on a history project that was due the following week. The house felt empty, quiet, exactly as I'd expected it to be. I decided to drive over to Mom's house to deliver David's portion of the Chinese food and maybe stay for a quick visit. As I approached her street, I felt that familiar warmth of anticipation. The joy of spending unexpected time with two of the people I loved most in the world. Mom's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by oak trees that she'd planted when my father was still alive. The porch light was on, but the living room was dark, unusual for 7 o'clock on a weeknight. Mom was always watching her evening news programs at this time. David's backpack was on the front steps, books scattered around it like he'd dropped everything in a hurry. I knocked gently on the front door, waited, knocked again. No answer. Using the spare key Mom had given me years ago, I let myself in and called out, "Mom, David, I brought dinner." The house was eerily quiet except for a sound coming from upstairs. a sound that made my heart start racing for reasons I couldn't immediately understand. It was muffled, rhythmic, accompanied by voices that seemed strangely intimate. My feet carried me toward the staircase despite every instinct telling me to turn around and leave. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, heavy, deliberate, terrifying. The sounds were coming from Mom's bedroom, the same room where she'd read me bedtime stories when I was little, where she'd comforted me through my first heartbreak, where she'd helped me get ready for my wedding day. I stood outside her bedroom door for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. My hand was trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Part of me knew. Some deep, horrible part of me already knew what I was about to discover. But my conscious mind couldn't accept it. Wouldn't accept it. When I opened that door, when I saw my 16-year-old son, my baby, in bed with my 62-year-old mother, my entire understanding of reality shattered into a million pieces. The air left my lungs. The strength left my legs. The world tilted on its axis, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. I don't remember making any sound, but I must have gasped or cried out because they both turned to look at me. David's face went completely white, his eyes wide with terror and shame. Mom sat up quickly, pulling a sheet around herself, but her expression wasn't shock or embarrassment. It was anger, pure, defensive anger. "Sarah, this isn't what you think," she started to say, but her words sounded distant, like they were coming from underwater. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing, couldn't make sense of the impossible scene in front of me. This was my mother, my son, two people I trusted more than anyone in the world, and they were. I turned and ran. Not walked, ran. Down the stairs, through the living room, out the front door, to my car. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely get the key into the ignition. Behind me, I could hear David calling my name, his voice cracking with desperation. But I couldn't turn around, couldn't face him. Couldn't face any of it. The drive home was a blur of tears and confusion. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every turn felt like I was navigating through a nightmare that I'd surely wake up from soon. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some explanation, some mistake. Some reason that what I saw wasn't actually what I saw. When I finally made it home, I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, just breathing, just trying to make my heart stop racing. How do you process something like this? How do you wrap your mind around a betrayal so complete, so devastating, that it calls everything you've ever believed into question? I called Michael 17 times, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Poker nights usually meant phones were turned off, but I needed him. I needed someone to help me make sense of what I'd witnessed. Someone to tell me I was crazy. Someone to hold me while I fell apart. Instead, I sat alone on my living room floor, still in my work clothes, staring at the family photos that lined our mantel. Pictures of David as a baby, pictures of Mom holding him when he took his first steps, pictures of our perfect, happy family that I now realized was built on lies I never could have imagined. The worst part wasn't just what I'd seen, it was the realization that this had probably been going on for months, maybe longer. All those late nights at Mom's house, all those secretive conversations, all those times I'd felt like an outsider looking in on my own family. How long had this been happening? How long had they been lying to me? How long had I been living in a fantasy while the two people I loved most were betraying me in the most unthinkable way? What would you do if you discovered something like this? How would you even begin to process this level of betrayal? How do you continue breathing when your entire world has just collapsed around you? The next morning, I woke up hoping it had all been a horrible nightmare. For about 3 seconds, those precious moments between sleep and full consciousness, I still lived in a world where my family was normal, where my mother was a saint and my son was just a regular teenager. Then reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. David came down for breakfast looking like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red and puffy, his usual confident posture replaced by shoulders that curved inward like he was trying to disappear. When he saw me sitting at the kitchen table, he froze, his face cycling through a dozen different emotions before settling on pure misery. "Mom, He started to speak, but I held up my hand to stop him. I wasn't ready. I couldn't handle that conversation yet. Instead, I made his lunch in complete silence. The same turkey sandwich I'd been making for him since elementary school, while he sat at the table radiating shame and fear. Michael could sense the tension immediately. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, looking back and forth between David and me with confused concern. David's eyes pleaded with me not to say anything, and despite my horror and anger, despite feeling like my heart had been ripped from my chest, I protected him. "Fine," I lied. "Just tired." That was the beginning of the longest 3 weeks of my life. I continued going through the motions of normal daily routine while carrying this massive secret that felt like it was poisoning me from the inside. I packed David's lunches, helped him with homework, drove him to school, all while looking at him and seeing him with my mother in ways that made me nauseous just thinking about it. The physical symptoms started almost immediately. Headaches that felt like someone was driving nails into my skull, a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe properly. I lost 12 pounds in 2 weeks because food tasted like cardboard, because my stomach was in constant knots, because I kept replaying that horrible scene over and over in my mind. My coworkers started asking if I was feeling all right. My best friend Jennifer called twice, asking why I seemed so distant during our usual weekly coffee dates. Even our neighbors commented that I looked tired, stressed, different. But how could I tell anyone? How could I explain that my 16-year-old son was having an inappropriate relationship with his grandmother, with my mother, and that I'd witnessed it with my own eyes? The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions that had no good answers. How long had this been going on? Was David being manipulated? Or was he a willing participant? Was my mother sick? Or evil? Or something I couldn't even comprehend? How had I missed the signs? What kind of mother was I that I couldn't protect my own child from something like this? Michael would try to hold me, try to comfort me when he noticed me tossing and turning. But I couldn't bear to be touched. Every physical contact reminded me of what I'd seen, made my skin crawl with revulsion and confusion. I started sleeping in the guest bedroom, claiming I had insomnia and didn't want to keep him awake. David stopped going to Mom's house as frequently, but when he did, he'd come home looking guilty and conflicted. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me with this expression of desperate sadness, like he wanted to explain or apologize but didn't know how. Other times, he'd avoid eye contact completely, hurrying to his room and closing the door behind him. If you're still with me this far, type "I'm still here" in the comments. I read every single one, and it means a lot to know you're listening to this difficult story. After 3 weeks of living with this secret, I knew I had to do something. The weight of it was destroying me, affecting my work, my marriage, my ability to function as a normal human being. I decided to start with subtle questions, gentle probing that might give David an opportunity to confess on his own. One Saturday morning while Michael was out running errands, I made David his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, the same meal I used to make for him when he was little and had bad dreams. I sat across from him at our kitchen table, trying to ignore how much older he looked, how much the innocence had faded from his eyes. "David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Are you okay? Really okay? You've seemed different lately. Distant, troubled." I kept my voice gentle, non-accusatory, hoping he'd see this as a safe space to tell me the truth. He looked up from his pancakes with eyes that held more pain than any 16-year-old should ever carry. For a moment, I thought he might break down, might tell me everything, might let me help him figure out how to fix this impossible situation. "I'm fine, Mom. Just school stuff. You know how junior year is." The lie came easily, too easily, and it broke my heart a little more. I tried a different approach. "How are things with Grandma? You two used to spend so much time together, but lately—" I let the sentence hang in the air, hoping he'd fill in the blank with some kind of explanation. His entire body tensed. He stopped eating mid-bite and stared down at his plate like it contained the most fascinating thing in the world. She's good, same as always." "David, if something was wrong, if something was bothering you or making you uncomfortable, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? Anything at all." I reached across the table to touch his hand, but he pulled away like I'd burned him. "Mom, please, I told you I'm fine. Can we not do this right now?" His voice cracked on the last word, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. But instead of breaking down, instead of letting me in, he stood up abruptly and left his half-finished breakfast on the table. That afternoon, I decided to try approaching Mom directly. I drove to her house with my heart pounding, rehearsing different ways to bring up what I'd witnessed without causing a complete family explosion. When she answered the door, she seemed perfectly normal, smiling, welcoming, acting like nothing had changed. "Sarah, honey, what a nice surprise. Come in. I just made some fresh iced tea." She bustled around her kitchen like always, the same movements, the same cheerful chatter. But now everything felt sinister and wrong. "Mom, we need to talk." I sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd taught me to do homework when I was in elementary school, and tried to find the courage to say what needed to be said. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" She sat across from me with that familiar maternal smile, the one that used to make me feel safe and loved, and I realized I had no idea how to have this conversation. "I'm worried about David. He seems different, secretive. I'm wondering if something's bothering him, something he might have talked to you about." I was testing the waters, giving her a chance to come clean without me having to explicitly mention what I'd seen. Her expression didn't change, didn't flicker with guilt or recognition. "Oh, you know teenagers. They go through phases. David's such a good boy, so mature for his age. I'm sure whatever's bothering him will work itself out." The casual way she dismissed my concerns, the way she called my son mature for his age with such fondness, made my stomach turn. I realized that she wasn't going to confess, wasn't going to make this easy, wasn't going to show any remorse for what she'd done to our family. I couldn't take it anymore. The pretending, the lies, the way everyone was acting like our family was normal when I knew the horrible truth. On a Tuesday evening in early April, I asked Michael to work late at his office. I told David I needed to have a serious conversation with his grandmother, alone. When I arrived at Mom's house, she greeted me with her usual warmth, but I could see something different in her eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. She knew this day was coming. She'd been waiting for it just like I had. "Mom, I know." The words came out quietly, barely above a whisper, but they filled the room like a shout. She didn't pretend not to understand, didn't ask what I meant, didn't try to deflect or deny. Instead, she sank into her favorite armchair, the one Dad used to read newspapers in, and aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice steady but defeated. 3 weeks. I came by to bring David dinner and I saw you, together, in your bedroom." Even saying the words out loud made me feel sick to my stomach. For several minutes, we sat in complete silence. The grandfather clock in her hallway ticked loudly, marking time in what felt like the longest moments of both our lives. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, broken, nothing like the strong, confident woman who had raised me. "Sarah, I know you'll never understand this, never forgive me. But I need you to know that I never meant for this to happen. After your father died, I was so lonely, so lost. David was the only person who made me feel alive again, who made me feel wanted and needed." The explanation hit me like a physical blow. This woman, my mother, the person I'd looked up to my entire life, was trying to justify having an inappropriate relationship with my child by claiming loneliness. "Mom, he's 16 years old. He's a child. He's your grandson. I know how it looks. I know how wrong it is, but Sarah, you have to understand. It's not what you think. We love each other, really love each other. Age is just a number when two souls connect like ours have." The words coming out of her mouth sounded insane, delusional, like she'd completely lost touch with reality. "Love." I repeated the word like it was poison in my mouth. "You think this is love? Mom, this is abuse. This is manipulation. This is—" I couldn't finish the sentence because I was crying too hard to speak. She stood up suddenly, her own tears flowing now, her voice rising with desperation. "Don't you dare call it abuse. David is mature. He's intelligent. He makes his own choices. I would never hurt him, never force him to do anything he doesn't want to do. He's 16. I screamed the words, all pretense of calm discussion abandoned. "He's a child. Children can't consent to relationships with adults, especially not with their grandmothers. How can you not see how sick this is?" That's when David walked through the front door. He must have heard us shouting from the street because he came directly to the living room where Mom and I were facing off like two warriors preparing for battle. When he saw both of us crying, when he realized the conversation we'd been having, his face crumpled with a mix of shame and protectiveness. "Mom, please don't yell at her. This isn't her fault. It's mine. I started it. I wanted it. She tried to stop me at first, but I convinced her." He was talking rapidly, desperately, trying to take responsibility, trying to protect the woman who had manipulated and abused him. "David, stop." I turned to face my son, this boy I'd raised, this child I'd protected and nurtured for 16 years, and I barely recognized him. "What she's done to you, what she's convinced you to believe, it's not your fault. You're the child in this situation. She's the adult. She's responsible." "You don't understand," he said, moving to stand next to Mom, taking her hand in his, looking at me like I was the enemy. "We love each other. What we have is special. It's real. It's not wrong if we both want it." Standing there in that living room, watching my mother and my son defend their relationship, seeing them united against me, I realized that I wasn't just dealing with a single moment of poor judgment. This was a complete breakdown of everything normal and healthy about family relationships. They had created their own twisted reality where their behavior made sense, where I was the outsider, where I was the problem. I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. Despite David and Mom's pleas to keep this family business private, I called my sister Lisa that same night. Lisa lived 3 states away with her own family, but she'd always been my closest confidant, the person I turned to when life became overwhelming. "Sarah, what's wrong? You sound terrible," were the first words out of her mouth when she heard my voice. "Lisa, I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm losing my mind, but I need someone to know, someone to help me figure out what to do." Through tears and stammering, I told her everything, the discovery, the confrontation, the way Mom and David were acting like their relationship was normal and healthy. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that I thought the call had been disconnected. When Lisa finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God, Sarah, oh my God, are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" I wish I wasn't. I wish I could convince myself it was a mistake. a misunderstanding, anything other than what it actually was. Lisa's reaction evolved through several stages over the course of our 2-hour phone call. First shock, then disbelief, then anger, then a protective fury that surprised us both. That woman has lost her mind. And David, Sarah, David is being manipulated. He might think he wants this, but he's 16 years old. His brain isn't even fully developed yet. Mom has taken advantage of him in the worst possible way. Having someone validate my feelings, having someone confirm that I wasn't overreacting or misunderstanding the situation, felt like being thrown a lifeline while drowning. For 3 weeks, I'd been carrying this secret alone, wondering if I was crazy, if maybe I was the one who didn't understand how families worked. Lisa insisted on calling our younger brother Tom, despite my protests that we should keep the circle of knowledge as small as possible. Tom's reaction was immediate and explosive. Within an hour of learning the truth, he was on the phone with me making plans to drive up from Ohio to handle this situation personally. "Tom, please. Violence isn't going to solve anything," I begged him, but I could hear the rage in his voice, the same protective instinct that Lisa had exhibited, but amplified by his personality and his relationship with Mom. "Sarah, that woman molested your son, our nephew. She's a predator, and she needs to face consequences." His words were harsh, but not wrong. In all my emotional turmoil, in all my focus on betrayal and family dynamics, I'd lost sight of the basic fact that what I'd witnessed was illegal, was abuse, was something that required more than just family conversations to resolve. The next few days brought a parade of difficult phone calls as Lisa and Tom contacted other family members, uncles and aunts and cousins who deserved to know why upcoming family gatherings would be different, why our family dynamics had fundamentally changed forever. Each conversation was a fresh wound, having to explain the situation repeatedly, watching people's reactions range from disbelief to horror to anger, fielding questions I didn't have good answers to. It was exhausting and traumatic in ways I hadn't anticipated. Some family members immediately rallied around David and me, offering support, expressing outrage at Mom's behavior, making it clear that they understood who the victim was in this situation. Others reacted with skepticism, suggesting that there might be more to the story, implying that maybe I'd misunderstood what I'd seen, making excuses for Mom based on her loneliness after Dad's death. The family members who doubted my account or tried to minimize what had happened were almost as painful to deal with as the original betrayal. These were people I'd known my entire life, people I'd trusted, and they were suggesting that I might be lying or exaggerating about something so serious and traumatic. Michael's reaction when I finally told him everything was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. My gentle, patient, diplomatic husband became a man I didn't recognize. He paced around our living room like a caged animal, his fists clenched, his voice shaking with rage. "I'm calling the police, tonight, right now. That woman belongs in prison." He was already reaching for his phone when I stopped him. "Michael, wait. I know you're angry. I'm angry too, but we need to think about David. If this becomes a legal matter, if there are arrests and court cases and media attention, what happens to our son? What happens to his future?" The next few hours were some of the most difficult of our marriage. Michael couldn't understand why I wasn't immediately pressing charges. I couldn't explain that my maternal instincts were still focused on protecting David, even from the consequences of his own actions and the actions of the woman who had manipulated him. We decided to start with family therapy, both for us as parents trying to navigate an impossible situation, and for David, who clearly needed professional help to understand what had happened to him. Finding a therapist who specialized in cases like ours was more challenging than I'd expected. Most family counselors deal with communication issues, divorce, typical teenage problems, not grandmother-grandson relationships that had crossed into criminal territory. Dr. Patricia Hendricks was recommended by our family physician as someone who had experience with cases involving inappropriate family relationships and manipulation of minors. Our first appointment was scheduled for the following week, giving us several days to prepare David for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. David's reaction to the news that we'd scheduled therapy was explosive. He accused me of trying to brainwash him, of not understanding what real love looked like, of being jealous of his relationship with Mom. The words cut deep because they echoed things Mom had clearly said to him, ways she'd framed the situation to make me look like the villain. "She loves me more than you ever have," he shouted during one particularly painful argument. "She listens to me. She understands me. She doesn't treat me like a child who can't make his own decisions." Hearing my 16-year-old son defend his inappropriate relationship with his grandmother by claiming she loved him better than his own parents was almost more than I could bear. It was clear that whatever had happened between them, however it had started, Mom had convinced David that their relationship was not only acceptable, but superior to normal family relationships. The first therapy session was awkward and tense. David sat in Dr. Hendricks' office with his arms crossed, answering questions with one-word responses, making it clear that he considered this whole process a waste of time. But Dr. Hendricks was patient and skilled, gradually drawing him out, helping him examine his feelings and beliefs without making him feel attacked or judged. Over several weeks of individual and family sessions, we began to make progress. David slowly started to understand that his feelings for Mom, while real and intense, had been manipulated and exploited by an adult who should have protected him rather than taking advantage of his adolescent confusion about love and sexuality. The breakthrough came during our 6th session when David finally broke down and admitted that he felt confused and scared about what had happened. "I don't know what's real anymore," he sobbed. "I thought I loved her. I thought she loved me. But now I don't know if that was actually love or something else. Something wrong. It's been 8 months since that horrible night when my world shattered. 8 months of therapy, family meetings, difficult conversations, and slow, painful healing. David is doing better, though he still has days when he struggles with guilt and confusion about what happened. We've learned that recovery from this kind of manipulation and abuse isn't linear, isn't simple, isn't something that can be fixed quickly or easily. Mom has been removed from our lives completely. The woman I thought I knew, the mother I loved and trusted, either never really existed or was destroyed by loneliness and desperation after Dad's death. I'll probably never know which explanation is true, and I'm learning to accept that some questions don't have satisfying answers. Through therapy, I've come to understand that what happened wasn't just about inappropriate physical contact. It was about a complete breakdown of normal family boundaries. Mom groomed David slowly over many months, convincing him that their relationship was special, that their love was deeper and more meaningful than typical family bonds, that age differences didn't matter when two people truly cared for each other. The signs were there, the secretive conversations, the unusual closeness, the way David pulled away from friends his own age. But they were so gradual and seemed so innocent that I missed them completely. I've learned that predators, even ones within families, are skilled at normalizing inappropriate behavior slowly over time until victims don't recognize that what's happening is wrong. One of the most important lessons has been understanding that David was a victim in this situation, not a willing participant making adult choices. One of the most important lessons has been understanding that David was a victim in this situation, not a willing participant making adult choices. At 16, his brain was still developing, his understanding of healthy relationships was still forming, and he was vulnerable to manipulation by an adult he trusted completely. The fact that he defended the relationship, that he claimed to want it, doesn't change the fundamental truth that children cannot consent to sexual relationships with adults, especially family members who hold positions of authority and trust. We've also learned about the devastating impact of family secrets and the importance of open communication. If I had felt comfortable asking direct questions earlier, if David had felt safe coming to me with his confusion about his feelings, if Mom had sought help for her loneliness instead of turning to her grandson for inappropriate comfort, this tragedy might have been prevented. The healing process has taught me that love sometimes means making incredibly difficult decisions. Cutting Mom out of our lives completely felt like cutting off a limb, but it was necessary to protect David and to show him that what happened was unacceptable. There are no exceptions to appropriate family boundaries, no circumstances that make it okay for grandparents to have sexual relationships with their grandchildren, no amount of loneliness or grief that justifies abusing a child's trust and innocence. Dr. Hendricks helped us understand that families affected by this type of abuse often struggle with feelings of shame and isolation. We felt like we were the only people who had ever dealt with something so twisted, so unthinkable. But sadly, inappropriate relationships between family members are more common than most people realize. The difference is that most families never talk about it, never seek help, never break the cycle of secrecy that allows abuse to continue. David is now 17 and preparing for his senior year of high school. He started dating a girl his own age, something that initially terrified me because I worried about how his experience with Mom might affect his ability to have healthy relationships. But through continued therapy and open family communication, he's learning to recognize the difference between appropriate teenage relationships and the manipulation he experienced. Some days are harder than others. David still sometimes expresses anger at me for destroying his relationship with Grandma. Still sometimes questions whether what happened was really as wrong as everyone says it was. These moments break my heart because they remind me of how deeply Mom's manipulation affected his understanding of love and relationships. But there are also days when I see glimpses of the happy, confident young man he's becoming. Days when he talks excitedly about college plans, or makes jokes with his friends, or shows genuine affection for Michael and me without the guilt and confusion that clouded our relationships for so many months. These moments give me hope that with time and continued support, he'll be able to move forward and build healthy relationships based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. Looking back on this nightmare, this betrayal that shattered everything I thought I knew about family and love, I've learned that healing is possible even from the most devastating wounds. Not complete healing, not a return to the innocence we lost, but a different kind of strength that comes from surviving something you never thought you could survive. The family I have now is smaller, more cautious, marked by an awareness of how quickly trust can be broken and how important it is to protect that trust. But it's also more honest, more open, more committed to genuine communication than the family we used to be. We've learned that perfect families don't exist, that everyone struggles with secrets and pain, and that the strongest families are the ones who face their problems honestly instead of pretending everything is fine. If you're dealing with a family secret that's eating away at you, if you've discovered something about people you love that challenges everything you believed, please know that you're not alone. Please know that healing is possible, that help is available, that you don't have to carry impossible burdens by yourself. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? How would you have handled discovering something so devastating about people you trusted completely? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective might help someone else who's struggling with an impossible situation. And if this story touched you, if it made you think about the importance of protecting children and maintaining healthy family boundaries, tap like and subscribe for more real-life stories that matter. Next, watch this story about a teacher whose secret nearly destroyed an entire community. Point to next video. Remember, families are supposed to be safe havens, places where children can grow and learn and develop without fear of manipulation or abuse. When that safety is violated, when trust is broken by the very people who should be protecting our children, we have to find the courage to speak up, to seek help, to choose healing over secrecy, no matter how difficult that choice might be. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying with me through the darkest chapters of my family's journey. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to keep dangerous secrets, even when breaking our silence means breaking our hearts.